All right, if everybody's ready, we have Mustafa Baltacı on stage with Dea Markova. Hopefully you enjoy this 360 ecosystem panel. And here's your...
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Does it work? Yeah, it works. Wonderful. Well, I mean, when we were designing the content of this event, we thought that we should do something about ecosystem. So ecosystem is another key word, as well as a hype in a way, and it has also become sort of another cliche stereotype because many people use it in different meanings. I mean, there's this technology platform. It could be based on advanced technologies like blockchain, and it is called an ecosystem of the relevant parties and stakeholders. So there are also, hubs like Co-op Hub. So they are also trying to build a community and ecosystem around that. So also cloud services. I mean, we get to hear this word in many places, in many instances. But what is really it, right? So this is the discussion when it comes to financial innovation and fintech. So this could be perhaps a good start to the discussion. Again, this is another 360 panel, so we'll be changing the seats, every 10th minute. So I'll stop here. Why don't you introduce yourself, so I'll take it up.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Dea Markova. I work in ecosystem development. It's actually in my job title for the FinTech office of the Monetary Authority of Singapore.
So my name is Mustafa Baltacı, and I'm one of the founders of Co-op Hub, which is the owner of the event. So we are also building an ecosystem, not only in Turkey, but also around the region, based on fintech and its relevant verticals. That's what we do. So I'll leave you the floor in terms of how you are building or enabling the relevant party stakeholders in your ecosystem, because Singapore is a leading financial hub, honestly, right, around the world. And it's one of the leading hubs. And I know that there's this ranking of international financial centers. I guess Singapore is one of the best three, or something like that. So, but when it comes to a convergence with technology, fintech, so to say, how does it work? What is really going on with that? And what is the role of Monetary Authority of Singapore?
So I should start by saying that MIS, in terms of regulatory architecture within Singapore, is all the central bank, the supervisor of all financial services institutions, as well, and we also have a market development mandate. So the message, in which we share across Singapore with our colleagues in the Economic Development Board and Enterprise Singapore. So it's our job to develop the market in addition to keeping the system safe and the consumers protected. So that's so that you know the perspective from which I'm coming from. Now, when we talk about building the Singapore ecosystem, and I agree with you, the word can mean everything and nothing. A few conferences ago, I was told that the ecosystem guys are like the powder monkeys back in the day, the ones that work, kind of take the powder and bring it to the people who are shooting. Now, take the pirate part of my analogy aside, I like that metaphor because that's what we do. We work behind the scenes to make sure that our economy and our digital economy develops at its full speed. So when we think about ecosystem development in Singapore, we look at kind of three areas, which are trust, technology, and talent. On the trust side, from a government perspective, we look at what are the public utilities that we can support develop in order for the rest of the ecosystem to grow on top of them. So for example, our minister spoke earlier this morning about Pay Now. So we have a fully interoperable payment system in Singapore where we can pay each other if we only know each other's phone number, or you can pay into a corporate if you know the unique number of that corporate. That is an industry-wide scheme which MAS developed together with the Association of Banks in Singapore. We also have a national digital identity, which sits on a hub of 33 different identifiers pulled from different government resources and driven by consent-based architecture. So that's another way where I, as a consumer, can identify myself within few clicks to a financial institution or to a telco, and then it can start providing services to me. So these are the kind of trust-based infrastructure pieces that we co-develop with our industry. Then I talked about tech. And you hear people talk about the ABCD of tech, about APIs, about blockchain, about cloud, and about data. So we work very deeply in all these areas where we have an API-enabled economy. We have various work streams which encourage our banks to be more API-driven. We've published a handbook. We work on a much we work on an industry-driven rather than a law-driven approach, which is a difference from the European market. We do have a vibrant blockchain ecosystem. We ourselves in MAS run a multi-year, multi-party experiment on distributed ledgers, which is called Project Ubin, now going into its fourth stage. One of the very first things on cloud, one of the very first things we published when we started our fintech journey were guidelines about, operational guidelines about developing and building in cloud. Which is what was our signal, saying that we are comfortable with this technology. We're comfortable at financial institutions relying on cloud. And the last bit is data, and we have a data analytics team internally. We also publish and speak a lot about the ethical use of data and data analytics, and encourage our companies to adopt deep data solutions. Advanced data analytics solutions more readily. And the last bit that no ecosystem can survive without is a proper talent strategy, both in developing, making sure that the talent coming out of universities is equipped with the so-called skills of the future, but also making sure that mid-career professionals are equipped with the right training, with the right incentives in order to adapt to the changes in the digital economy. As part of that also is access to capital. And there are various schemes and incentives for that Singapore has developed, where there's a relaxed regime about basing your venture capital fund in Singapore. We've got a support scheme to attract private equity infrastructure funds. So we take care of the venture capital private equity community, as well as one of the key drivers for growth in the fintech ecosystem.
So that answers my second question too. But let me resonate on some of the challenges. These are the challenges. That's why we are thinking of building an ecosystem. An ecosystem means the right parties or partners or clients and producers or developers, providers. They get together, they mingle with each other, they find each other, right? So perhaps I can touch briefly on the Turkish market here in terms of the challenges. There are two problems basically. The first one is mismatches and linkage problems physically, meaning that a startup, many startups, they're having hard time in terms of accessing to right clientele, right? It's not quite easy to reach out to the banks, insurance companies, so there is this, one single problem. The second problem is there is no regulatory sandbox, as you do in Singapore and in some other countries too, and we don't have PSD2. That's why the API services are not readily available. So it's not quite easy to digitally integrate with the right customers, right, for the startup. So this is the second challenge. That's why we are trying to focus on our community enabling program into these two topics. So even this event, right, even our meetups, our roundtable discussions, we try to bring these right parties together. So they have proven to be something quite successful in the respect. So this is the first physical outcome. And in the respect, I guess we are facilitating the building of ecosystem. Second one is digital integration, or it could be an API marketplace, so on and so forth. We are getting there. It's not quite easy to do, but we are working on the project with the relevant technology partner, as well as some global players, so on and so forth. So it is still under construction. So we have a minute, perhaps, more. why don't you, speak about the challenges that you see and the reasons why you have built this quite comprehensive program within the MENA or within the Singapore ecosystem?
Okay. I think one thing that one part of the market that we're focused on a bit more than the other is actually the enterprise level, the B2B startups. So usually, the narrative usually goes that there's increasing in affluence and very populous areas outside of Singapore. And our narrative has always been that companies that are based in our market should be looking at our neighboring markets as where they can scale their technologies. So the B2C opportunity is perhaps well understood, and you see a lot of the e-commerce platforms growing at a neck-breaking speed. The B2B opportunity, the length of sales cycles within institutions, the ability of institutions to adopt these solutions, and not just the top tier banks, of which most have a representation in Singapore, but also the tier 2, tier 3 digital banks, which are powering all the communities in the ASEAN region. The ability to access those markets and for them to integrate these B2B solutions is something that we're very actively working on. We've built a platform called Apix, which allows these kind of banks to both discover, develop, and deploy the fintech solutions. So we're particularly focused on the B2B side of the market.
Wonderful. So that's my cue. It's flashing red, so I need to step off the stage. And I'm leaving it to you, and the next speaker, it is going to be with you. So thank you.
Hello. Yep.
So I suppose we're shifting roles, right? Now I'm in the role of the moderator, and I have Afik from Kazakhstan with me. So would I let you introduce yourself and tell the audience what you do?
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's awake after a very good lunch. My name is Afik Johar, the Chief FinTech Officer at the AIFC FinTech Hub. Now, the AIFC, the Astana International Financial Center, is based in the capital of Kazakhstan. We're a new financial hub where we're positioning ourselves to be both the gateway and hub into Central Asia. We are an independent jurisdiction based on English common law. So we have our own independent courts, our own independent arbitration center, as well as our regulator, the Astana Financial Services Authority, which interestingly, we also have our own regulatory sandbox. We have 6 core business pillars very quickly. The first would be a focus on capital markets. So we have the Astana International Exchange, which is co-owned by the AIFC. We have shareholders including NASDAQ, Goldman Sachs, and the Shanghai Stock Exchange. We also have a big focus on developing asset management, private banking, Islamic finance, green finance, and lastly, fintech as a underlying pillar to really future-proof all those core business pillars, but also to drive new businesses into this area.
Okay, so I'll ask you a very direct question, if I may. If I'm a Turkish fintech sitting in the audience and I've taken your business card after you step off this stage, why should I call you?
Why should you call us? So I think the first main opportunity would be Kazakhstan and not only Central Asia. So what I often pitch when I'm speaking internationally is that a lot of people don't even know where Kazakhstan is. But for me, I come from Malaysia originally. So Southeast Asia has really gone through rapid modernization, but the whole Central Asia is still pretty much off the map. So we're looking at really first mover advantage into the last frontier of Asia. And I think as not only Kazakhstan, but other neighboring countries like Uzbekistan slowly liberalize and open up, there are immense opportunities of investing into the region.
And in terms of the companies that you're supporting to grow on your market, what are the kind of propositions that you're seeing? What are the first fintech business cases that are being developed that get you excited?
So we're seeing a lot of very interesting companies coming to our region. So we have about 15 companies that are authorized for our regulatory sandbox. And that ranges from crypto exchanges, for example, to Islamic crowdfunding, into neobanks. And I think a lot of people are slowly exploring the opportunities in Central Asia. So you talked about Singapore's focus on B2B, and there's already a lot of traction in B2C. Now, in Kazakhstan, for example, the banked population is relatively low at 59%, but internet penetration, meanwhile, is around 80%, and smartphone penetration's around 50 to 60%. So conditions are really ripe for digital banking, and I think there's a big push on cashless. So I think there are many, many opportunities in B2B. Meanwhile, I think perhaps the banks in Kazakhstan are slightly on the slower side to look at digital banking, but there has been big initiatives by the government. So for example, last year there was a big initiative called Digital Kazakhstan, which is really looking at digitization of both the economy but also government. And by virtue of that, with our role in the AIFC, I think we're really helping and to support the banks to really drive and accelerate their whole digital agenda. So many, many opportunities, and I think we have a lot to learn from other international partners.
So you mentioned there's a digital bank that is applied for acceptance into your sandbox. So what would be the journey from a sort of arrival? On what basis does that digital bank, what is the kind of experimentation that you're doing with them in their sandbox, and what would be the legal framework in which they can go to market currently in Kazakhstan?
So I think until the relevant legislation is approved on our side, I think we're enabling such startups to actually test within confined limits. So I think it really depends on a case-by-case basis what type of business they're planning to roll out, and I think they have to work very closely with our regulator, the Astana Financial Services Authority, who will then be granting them principal approval to test in a live environment. So I think we've recently rebranded our sandbox as the FinTech Lab, so the idea is for them to really test in a live environment across multiple countries.
And if a fintech is to build their business in Kazakhstan, should they be looking at Astana? How does it look? How does it work between capital to regions, for example, in terms of opportunities?
Well, I think the first natural step coming from the AIFC would be to be registered with us, but there is no specific need to be physically located in Kazakhstan. In Astana itself. So if a business were to do, let's say, mobile banking in Almaty or other regional cities, it doesn't really matter. So it's not physically location agnostic. So yeah, I think looking at the timer, I do have some questions about Singapore. So as you know, last year the AIFC signed a cooperation agreement with MAS at the Singapore FinTech Festival. And beyond that, there's a lot of international cooperation G2G-wise between Kazakhstan and Singapore. So a lot of countries and a lot of emerging hubs look at Singapore as a model, say, okay, Singapore is one of the leading FinTech hubs globally. But what did it look like? What was that starting point for Singapore's FinTech journey?
Thanks for that. So we usually talk about Singapore's fintech journey starting a bit over 3 years ago, which is where we set up the office that I currently sit in, the fintech office of MIS. Around the same time, we launched a grant scheme to the tune of 225 million Singapore dollars, which we deploy in different parameters. We support proofs of concepts, institutional projects, industry-wide projects. So as a result of that, we're seeing a lot more activity, a lot more collaboration between startups and institutions on the market, which is in some way supported by that grant scheme. So we did have the ability to do direct support through this horizontal office that we created within the regulator. Subsequently, we've also created an office on data and analytics, which in itself covers RegTech. The second bit was about the grant support that we're able to give. And thirdly, and very importantly, we send a signal out that from a regulatory perspective, we're embracing digitalization, which is where we published our operational guidelines about working with cloud, which is when we started a regulatory sandbox. And all of these things, so in Singapore, we talk about developing a smart financial center that all these initiatives are parked under. That is part of a broader government initiative about being a smart nation. So there's really is, and I think that was reflective in Minister Iswaran's comments this morning, this really is a whole of a government initiative to be a smart nation, to embrace digitalization, to embody the spirit of innovation in the way we approach the various problems that we're trying to solve, whether they're in the financial services or not. So it started with a kind of a whole of government effort. There were these three areas around direct office, direct support, around the grants, and around adopting our regulatory framework to be ready, digital ready. So those are kind of the starting. That was the onset of Singapore's fintech journey, if you will.
Okay, and I guess a related question would be, what does Mas expect to get out of international partnerships? For example, being here in Istanbul. Like, are you looking to attract Turkish companies to Singapore, for example, or are you looking at exporting existing technology?
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the history of Singapore from a trade or to a technology perspective, it's absolutely crucial that the Singapore is a very open economy, a hub into Southeast Asia. So both from the perspective of companies that are born in Singapore and they're looking to expand globally, and vice versa, companies that are born in, let's say, Turkey or other markets that are looking for a gateway into ASEAN and broader Southeast Asia. That's usually how we develop a trade route, if you will. The other thing that we tend to do is we work either on a government-to-government or industry association-to-industry association level, where we develop collaborative cross-border projects. So we have one with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority around trade finance on the blockchain. We have one with the Bank of Canada on experimenting with cross-border payments, again on a distributed ledger. There are other examples like that. So being an open, collaborative economy is absolutely key for the growth of Singapore, and it has always been.
Okay, great.
All right, I think we're getting a star for being on time.
Yeah, we have 10. Yeah.
And
Thank
it's
you,
time
Dia.
for me to go.
Okay, so next up we have Namir Khan from the MENA FinTech Association. Welcome.
Thank you very much. You can hear me well.
Right, so if you'd like to start by maybe providing an introduction about yourself.
Sure. So I am basically at the moment chairing the MENA FinTech Association, and apart from that, I'm also the executive advisor to Arab Monetary Fund (AMF), working on 22 countries and establishing the FinTech framework.
Okay, fantastic. So it's glad to have you here. So could you, I think, if we talk about the latest news coming out from the GCC, so a lot of people are talking about Kareem's recent exit to Uber, and I think if you look at the rise of DIFC Hive, Bahrain FinTech Bay, ADGM, there's a lot of initiatives around FinTech. Could you maybe explain to us in the audience a bit about the FinTech ecosystem in GCC?
This is the best time to be in GCC in the MENA region. That's what I would say, number one. Why is that? Because MENA FinTech Association is working with and representing 22 countries itself, one. The second thing is that we're looking at a region with a population of 280 million people, and I always highlight the basic importance of it, with the mobile phone penetration of 110% and smartphone 76%, median age being at 26, and at the same time, the financial inclusion being at 15% highlights the importance of what you're looking at, number one. Number two, the insurance penetration in the region is 0.67%. And at the same time, you have the likes of Kareem and Souk.com really rising up. That tells you that the region is ready for such developments right now. So there has never been a better time. Apart from that, in terms of the initiatives, so in the MENA region, what we're doing with the AMF as well is, and also with the GCC FinTech Task Force, we have established a framework such there we are basically ensuring that every specific country is leading a FinTech initiative that establishes the local ecosystem. And that is itself creating a very conducive environment for external innovators from Turkey, from Singapore, from different places from all over the world to come into the region and innovate. So as you can see, as you just mentioned, DIFC has their own initiative, which is FinTech Hive. We have ADGM with the Reg Lab. Then at the same time, we have Bahrain Central Bank with Bahrain FinTech Bay. We have initiatives coming in from Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt. So yes, a fantastic opportunity right now to be in the region, and once again, every central bank is taking the lead when it comes to FinTech, and that's on the strong mandate for AMF too.
Fantastic. And what role does the MENA FinTech Association play specifically? So I think you've talked a bit about coordinating with the AMF, but also the different organizations. Are there any specific activities that you run to support local fintechs in expanding into other markets?
Absolutely. This is one of the core things we're doing. So the association brings together the startups, the students, the regulators, the corporates under one platform. Why we are doing this? So we have our 12 committees like every other association has, but then again, we have a vision against it. The vision is that every committee is going to be, we have a reporting framework such that on a quarterly basis, we take these reports and we give them out to the regulator that, hey, this is what the community is saying when it comes to RegTech, this is what the community is saying when it comes to InsurTech, or be that any other wealth tech. So the reporting is on a quarterly basis. Once it goes to the regulators, they have a voice coming in from the community, what is required from the ground, people who are actually executing and innovating, right? So this basically helps in establishing regulations and policies that are conducive for growth for the overall ecosystem. So that's what one of the critical roles the association has. Number one, engage the community, bring them together under one platform. 1, 2, take insights out from you. 3, articulate those insights and then take them forward towards a very refined way of ensuring that there are regulations that are conducive for growth for the overall ecosystem that promotes internal, within the region startups and also startups coming in from international countries to come in and innovate as openly as possible.
Okay, so let's say we have startups from the Astana International Financial Center of Kazakhstan. What would be the biggest opportunities or sectors in MENA for our community, for example?
So, see, one of the things is financial inclusion is massive, right? And how do you tackle financial inclusion? Everyone knows that financial inclusion today is being tackled by digital, right? So digital is once again an amazing and a fantastic opportunity. Our regulators are really open towards open banking and we're already piloting a lot of stuff. So financial inclusion is one. Payments, see, that's one of the most disrupted sector world over. Payments is the second model, yeah? After that, insurance. Insurance is an open play field. I just told you 0.67%. One of the most and the critical pain points. Fourth is a RegTech. So since the regulators right now are willing to innovate, the regulators right now are willing to come up with new propositions. They're hearing you out. RegTech is very important. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I find it very interesting that there are many similarities between the state of play of fintech in the MENA region and looking at Kazakhstan and Central Asia. So
and that's why we partner.
Yes, exactly. So I think if I look at it realistically, we're several years behind. We also have similar types of issues that we're looking at. So if you look at insurance, for example, insurance is relatively underdeveloped. And I think that is a function of relatively lower disposable incomes. But as we look in the long-term horizon or the medium term, as incomes in Kazakhstan and Central Asia are expected to rise, insurance should definitely be a key sector to invest into. Likewise, when you talk about financial inclusion, it's how do we bank the unbankable or the underbanked. And I think although there are strong prospects from a numerical perspective, so both Kazakhstan and Central Asia, at least the captive target population of our area is about 200 to 300 million people. If you look at Central Asia, Western China and Southern Russia. And although from a numbers perspective it's a relatively young population, but infrastructure will be a core issue to address moving forward.
So my question would be to you that how would you then build up, what's the way forward that Astana is taking ahead when it comes to building up the ecosystem? And how do you structure it to ensure that you're able to really boom up the overall, the entire environment when it comes to fintech?
Yeah, so I think we're undertaking a lot of various different initiatives. Using Astana, the International Financial Center, as a hub. So we're creating our own co-working space, incubator programs. We've run our first accelerator program last year, where we accelerated about 8 early stage startups, and we're going to be launching our second cohort later this year. But beyond the core hygiene factors for developing a startup hub, I think our real focus is really on deepening our ties with other Central Asian countries. Because ultimately we want to be the gateway and the hub into Central Asia.
Agreed.
Yes.
I think that's super. And in fact, that's what's actually important as well. When you position yourself as a gateway, right, to access to, to other CS countries as well. That really creates access for everyone around as well to know that, okay, fine, there's one gateway via which we can access this amazing untapped market, which I personally feel is completely untapped till date. And I mean, I think your efforts should be laudable as well, that you're doing a fantastic job in that. And once again, initiatives such as, recently in Abu Dhabi, we have also launched the Hub 71. I'm sure you all must have known, a $142 million fund that has been launched. So, once again, when the government takes up these initiatives, when they are pushing and they're willing to invest, and then right after you heard this, the success story of Kareem, that kind of really highlights the importance of the government to push, that really brings in forward the conduciveness of the overall system, right? And I believe that all the other countries who are also out there, and many of you are from multiple countries, I think this is the word that needs to go out. It needs to be top-down approach and understand that the future lies in this industry itself, where the blend of technology and finance needs to come in from top-down.
Yep. So I think you have a very broad geographical base that you're looking
Yes.
at, right? How do you perceive different hubs competing against each other? So you have Abu Dhabi, you have Dubai, you have Bahrain coming up. Do they look at it from a collective strategy, or do you think competition is good in this case?
Absolutely. You see, competition is always healthy as long as it's healthy, one. Number two, when the association was being formed, all of us came together. So MENA FinTech Association has advisors from Bahrain, from Saudi, from Lebanon, from Egypt, and even international countries too. There is a common goal to ensure that there is growth, to ensure that there is an environment that promotes conduciveness for the fintech ecosystem. We all have independent hubs. That's great, that's fantastic. But the overall thing that we're basically focusing on is ensuring MENA grows. That's the overall mandate that we carry, growth of MENA. So competition will remain there. That's not going to go away, but that's only going to be, I must say, very, very conducive for the community itself. And the best bit is that in UAE, we have the Central Bank of UAE, who is really pushing forward with POCs, who is really pushing forward and collaborating with the MENA FinTech Association as well to ensure that we come up with propositions that create true impact. So even before launching them out, we ensure that we pilot them, we test them, and then we take them out.
Okay, so unfortunately we're out of time, but let's definitely continue our conversations and look forward to meeting anyone who's interested in the AIFC after the panel session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Afiq. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
And now I would like to invite Alex from Loft. He's the head of partnerships. Alex, please join us here.
Man, I love your scarf.
Thank you very much. I never try to. It just stays with me all the time.
Without any notes, remember all those numbers, all those facts. I'm impressed.
Probably I've been selling all the time now, so yeah.
Too many times, yeah. So as Namir mentioned, I'm Alex Panikan. I'm the head of partnership and ecosystem at the Loft. The Loft is the Luxembourg House of Financial Technologies. It's a fintech hub based in Luxembourg.
So tell me a little more about the Loft. So when it comes to Loft, how do you work? How do you operate? And how are you building up the ecosystem? Because that's important, ecosystem build up. And you guys, I mean, talking about you, Nasser, the team I know, aggressive and doing multiple initiatives. How have you structured this?
We put Luxembourg on the map. So the Loft started with nightmares. Not many people know that, but the Loft started with our finance minister having nightmares and sleepless nights because it didn't know how to make sure that Luxembourg stayed the thriving financial center it is today in 10, 20 years. And one day in 2015, he had the Eureka Moment when he said, the answer is fintech. So let's build a fintech hub, but not just to welcome fintech, help fintechs, but to help the financial actors and connect the fintechs with the banks, with the insurance, with the asset managers, because Luxembourg is the second fund industry in the world. And yeah, here we are, 2 years later, with 50 fintechs incubated, 120 fintechs as members, and I think we reached 200 fintechs in Luxembourg.
Fantastic. So like, you have 150 members. You're saying something. Sorry.
Yeah. But again, our goal is not to attract fintechs. That's not our main mission, to attract fintechs in Luxembourg. Our main mission is to find the best solution in the world, wherever they are, in Astana, Singapore, Dubai. We have some from Dubai, by the way. And to make
We
sure
have yours too.
and to make sure that they work with the financial actors in Luxembourg. That's our main goal. That's our first mission. And yes, we build this innovative hub again, where regulator, financial actors, fintechs, university researchers come all together to bring some innovation in the financial industry.
So when you talk about universities, what's your engagement with the academia itself? Like, how do you intend to work with it? So in our country, so we have like multiple universities that we are currently working with when it comes to academic side, right? Ensuring that we are taking the research and development happening when it comes to the faculty, let's say in Sharjah, in Dubai, or let's say in Bahrain even, or in Abu Dhabi. So we collate it into one place, we create more insights, and then we take it towards the regulators. How are you basically establishing this in Loft?
So when we started, we didn't thought about education, but very quickly we understood one thing: there is no innovation without education.
Agreed.
It's funny, I was in Paris 2 weeks ago, and we were at a university festival with 10 of the biggest universities in France. And one student came to me, he's finishing his master in finance, portfolio manager. And he asked me, what's a robo-advisor? When I explained to him, he was crying. He said, what do you mean? I've studied 2 years, my master, and those guys with robo-advisor are going to replace me. And it gives you that, we don't see enough fintech classes in universities. So, but beyond starting with universities, we have 4 programs in Luxembourg, starting at 6 years old, when you teach them entrepreneurship, when you teach them finance. And we have our last program is from 15 to 18 years old. It's called the Luxembourg Tech School, where you teach kids not to know how to code, but to become digital leaders. And that's very important. So we just had last weekend, a hackathon with them. They built the insurance of the future with connected devices.
And how old were they?
18, 15, 16.
Okay.
Yeah. So 20 kids playing around for one weekend and building the future of insurance. We also have the same kind of hackathon for the banking, where they build the future of banking. So what do you think, Namir, is the answer of a kid of 15 years old when you ask him what's the bank of the future?
Wow, I would like to speak to them then. So you see, the thing is that
he will answer you. There will be no bank tomorrow.
So in fact, to resonating to what you say, I was doing a session very recently with PwC, and then that was the point that we discussed. That if you want to know the future, if you want to know what's going to be happening, speak to your kids. Because they're the ones who are less distracted, and they're the ones who actually spend a lot of time in thinking about new age technologies. They spend so much time that they can give you so many insights on what the future is going to be. I'm sure how many of you must have actually thought of multiple game-changing ideas and solutions when you were kids, and then you saw them happening, and they were a reality probably now, and probably a decade back now. That's the thing. So when you want to know the future, talk to the kids. But yes, banks are not going to be there. So, yeah.
For them, in 3 days, they built a blockchain platform where they can transfer fiat currency, cryptocurrency via to each other. So when you have the CEO of one of the biggest banks in Europe, it's a French bank, asking those kids and realizing that for the last 2 years, they didn't manage to do what 15 years kids have managed to do in 3 days, it's a problem. And I see that this kind of program, educational program with 15-year-old kids, has more impact on the financial industry than all the fintechs that we can introduce to our partners.
So we were trying to do something very similar as well ourselves, because we were trying to basically, and in fact we have lined up, so we'll launch the date very soon for that. So basically having a session with the kids.
Yeah.
So we have called all the working moms, right, and asked them to bring the kids as well. All the kids are going to be there, and we'll be actually doing a fintech-based session with the kids. And that is being designed by one of the schools out of UAE. So the reason why we're doing this is, number one, to impart education at a very, very young age, make them comfortable with money. They understand money. If they know how to deal with money, then they know how to basically deal with insurance as well. That is another key thing that we'll be having, because in our region, some people don't trust insurance as much, right? So bringing in that trust element when it comes to financial services, right? And the third thing is that bringing in true insights out from the kids, because eventually that is where, that's an additional place where innovation really comes in. And trust me, we have some fantastic, some crazy ideas coming in from those kids. We've already had those, we tested this, it was a good response.
Exactly, but it's beyond the idea. They do have crazy ideas, they are very visionary, but also know how to code and to build those products of tomorrow.
So is there any coding initiative that Loft needs to, you think that Loft will be coming up with? So for example, in MENA, we have the Arab Coders Initiative, right? So we try to basically bring in the top coders, and we encourage all the top coders to come in and, hey, innovate. Come on, show us what skills you have. Is there any such initiative right now that you have?
We are working on that. But beyond that, because education is one thing for the kids, but we need to educate also the people who work in banks. Because as I said, our mission is to make sure that those banks are here in 10, 20 years. But the thing that we see that we automate the process, and a lot of people will lose their job.
Agreed.
So how to make sure that those people have a job tomorrow, and what kind of job? I don't know what's your intake, what you do.
My take is very simple. AI is going to be there, blockchain is going to be there, everything is going to be there, but you got to divide that in simple plain verticals. So you have RPA as well. So RPA is a short-term implementation, instant RPA can be done. Then you have, then you talk about blockchain. Blockchain is medium term. Then you talk about the AI. AI is long term. So if I'm talking about why would humans be replaced? Humans would be replaced when it comes to RPA, mainly. Very typical processes which will eliminate the basic redundant jobs. Blockchain is there, it's going to enable. AI, if it's going to compare itself with the human brain, that's 100 years from now, right? So jobs are not going to go anywhere. Only the humans are going to become a lot more efficient, smarter, and that is only going to amp up the overall financial services landscape as well. I personally feel jobs are going to be created.
You don't think that technology will replace the humans?
Yeah?
You don't think that those technologies will replace the humans?
No, I do not. I think it's all about humans as well. So we cannot just always keep something on the, we cannot just blame technology at all times. We as humans need to be smart as well. If technology is becoming smarter, we as humans need to be smarter, and that's how we will be actually complementing it. So, yeah.
Totally agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It's been a nice session, very interesting discussion.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm always there, any questions that
Big applause, please.
Thank you.
Yes, I would like to ask Niccolò Petrone from Italy to come on stage.
Is it working?
It should work.
Good, right?
It's
Good.
working.
Thank you so much. Hi,
Good.
everyone.
So, Niccolò, you know the exercise. Please introduce yourself.
Yes.
What you do and what's Medici about.
So, everyone, my name is Niccolò Petrone, and I'm leading the European expansion of Medici, which is currently, I would say, the largest innovation marketplace, between US, Europe, and Asia. So we are tracking more or less 15,000 fintechs, which are classified in all the fintech verticals. We are working with about 100 banks, and we gather an ecosystem of 180 investors from the leading countries.
Okay, so you are, let's say, an accelerator kind of company where you help fintechs work with banks. A bit what we are doing.
Exactly.
How do you do it exactly? If I'm a fintech, what maturity do I have to have? Sometimes, every day I have two crazy guys coming to me with an idea. Are you going to accept me if I'm coming to you with just an idea?
Yeah, so the reality is that, when you look at the fintech partnership from a bank's perspective, it is way tougher, right? Because they have an ecosystem of 15,000 companies to look at. How do they pick them? Now, after 5 years in the ecosystem, what we have realized is that the opportunity for early stage companies in closing deals with banks is very little. And we were believing in the opposite until last year, but we have seen so many early stage partnership not actually reaching even a pilot stage. Now, why am I saying that?
Yeah.
I'm saying that because where are we focusing now is to pick the sweet spot of fintech companies in growth stage that not everyone knows, but which have high potential to integrate with the bank in the shortest period of time. Right, at the end of the day, if you're a bank, you're not a disruptor, unless you are, let's say DBS in Singapore, with whom we are working closely. And so the only thing that you have to do is to understand which is the market gap and then fill it. And this is what most of the banks don't understand. That's why they try to go too much on early stage. Let me just make one example, just to clarify the difference. When I look at companies like BBVA, right, they have a very strong marketing channel, which is the open talent, which enables them to engage with early stage players. Now, if you look at with how many of them they've been actually building a solid partnership, the percentage is very little. When they are getting serious, they either buy fintechs or they engage with them on non-traditional channels and they lead partnership in the shortest period of time.
Okay. The issue we have at the Loft, when we introduce very mature companies working with the banks, we know the solution works. The bank wants to work with the guys. I mean, the CEO wants to work with the bank, the manager wants to work with the bank, but then we face a problem. It's the procurement process. We talk about that.
Yes.
How you guys deal with it? I mean, at the Loft, we are trying to build some kind of labelization stuff for fintechs who, with this label, will, let's say, be onboarded more quickly and more faster by the banks. And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I think we've been doing a couple of actions. We've been taking a couple of actions to prevent this problem from happening. And just to be more specific, I think when we look at a potential partnership and where does it stop, I think there are three key elements here. One is that the innovation team is not able to create a solid business case for the bank. Okay. That's why the sell-in is the core issue here. They're not able to sell the fintech to the business line. And I've seen that many cases. The second problem, I would say, is on the compliance side. Because if you go to your compliance department and you have not ticked all the boxes, then you will have hard times in bringing the POC to execution in a short time. Now, the way we're addressing that is been by creating a joint go-to-market with Ernst & Young to launch the first execution-driven accelerator in which we take care of the problem statement analysis, scouting and selection. And when it comes to actually defining the road to POC, they come into place. They make sure that the startup is compliant. They know exactly the legacy system of the bank and the core challenges in integration because that's their job. And we basically finish up the activity with a POC which is defined and which is reached in a very, very short period of time.
Okay. Speaking of partnership, when I started at the Loft 2 years ago, it was, they were laughing at us when we introduced fintechs to banks. And they see, what do I need to work with those guys? And we explain. And now there is a bit of maturity in the country, in the industry, all over Europe, over the world, I think. When banks see fintechs, regtechs as a strategic partners, what kind of trends do you see at Medici with your fintechs and partners?
Yes, so in terms of partnerships, I think depending on where you look at it, right? Because we are very active in the US, but also Europe and Asia. And what I'm seeing, being in the space for about 5 years, right, that whatever happens in the US, then happens in Europe with about 12 months of delay, and then happens in Asia with 18 months of delay from the US. And this enables us to actually understand the trends in the banks and fintech partnership. And I want to be more specific.
Yeah, please.
And again, whatever I'm telling you doesn't come from research or everything, but comes from the feedback that we have got from going to market in all these 3 regions, from sales conversations. And I personally spoke with about 180 banks between Europe and Africa. So I got some of this feedback, which I'm going to share with you now. So I think in phase 1 of bank and fintech collaboration, about 2013, 2012, 2013, right? What was going on is that banks realized that their industry was going to be disrupted. So they wanted to find a clear and precise engagement channel to understand which were the players. That's why they started investing in external accelerators like 500 startups, plug and play, and many others. Now, the output of this phase is that after 1 year, they realized that the return on investment on the 150 or 200K spent on plug and play were equal to 0 because nothing was going to execution.
Exactly.
So what do? Right?
Tell us.
Yeah, they realized that the problem was not much into the engagement, but was more shifted onto the organization. So they had to act not anymore on the scouting, but on how to involve the business lines into the innovation process. And this is not something that an innovation department can do alone, but they need to have the support from the CEO of the bank. That's why you see that the most successful banks like BNP Paribas, like BBVA, like DBS, they all have extremely strong commitment from the CEO.
Citigroup too.
Citigroup too, as well.
I had the CEO of Citigroup Global coming to the Loft. And it's funny because one of our fintechs, Duco, is doing data, tried to work with them for more than 1 year. And this guy came, he showed the solution, I need that. 2 weeks later, the solution was deployed worldwide. So when the CEO wants something, it's get done.
Also where there is budget, right? Because sometimes people complain that they cannot do innovation. It's true, right? If they only have the 0.6% of the budget allocated to innovation, how the hell can they do execution? It's impossible.
Yeah.
So just to finish up the thought, right?
We still have 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Speed up.
So what happened after the initial phase is that then banks are looking for new ways to engage the business lines. And for example, ING, they said, why do we need to rely on an external accelerator? We can build our own. Why? So that they can engage the business line internally and involve them during the selection process of the cohort they are going on board. And this has been proved to be extremely valuable as methodology. And you just look at the partnership that ING is leading in Europe. So I think that was an extremely interesting approach. The second one was similar to what Generali Insurance has been adopting. They do zero PR, they do zero spending on marketing in terms of partnership with fintech. But then if you look at some of the partnerships they've been leading, you will be surprised. There is one of the company they're cooperating with for internal process restructuring, which is now worth $2 billion, but no one knows about it, right? But that's a successful case of a fintech partnership.
Yeah, but I do have other example of innovation labs in banks that didn't work out for some of the fintechs.
For sure.
Because
maybe they were too early stage.
Maybe they were too early stage.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. I guess my time is due. I let the next speaker. Thank you so much for your answers.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, so let me welcome Stan on board. Stan, good. So why don't you tell something more about yourself and your background, just to get started.
For my guy.
So my name is Stan Nazarenko. Can you hear me? Yes, you can. Fantastic. I am the director of InsurTech Ireland, a community organization in Ireland that connects incumbents, insurtechs, and just technology people who are interested in maybe creating an insurtech business together to discuss the role that the technology will play in the future of insurance. I also happen to be a CEO of an insurtech startup, so I can talk about the challenges and benefits of being in the ecosystem from my personal experience.
Yeah, exactly. And even when we look at the insurtech ecosystem, I think those are enormously different depending on where you are. I mean, in Italy we have a specific insurtech ecosystem focused on IoT and telematics, which is by nature, the strong asset of what we do have in Italy. But I would love to understand from you, right? How do you see the international ecosystem evolving, but also the ecosystem in Ireland evolving in the last few years, and the future trends that you see?
Yes, it's a good question. For those of you who worked in the insurance industry, you know that it's a massive industry by size, but it's a small world, so everybody knows each other. And InsurTech ecosystem kind of copies the same sort of structure that it's very vibrant. There are so many new propositions out there, but we're very tightly bound together. The degree of separation is definitely significantly less than 2. And it really helps to be able to reach out to almost anyone in the world and get their advice and learn from them. Speaking of Ireland, it's an interesting place to be because historically we have the majority of global international players present in Ireland. So we have a big pool of professionals, both with technology and insurance background. So it's an ideal place to start insurtech businesses. At the same time, when we started our own business a year and a half ago, we realized that there's a bit of a gap there because these people who are highly skilled and they really know what may change the industry, they weren't really talking to each other. And they had to go to London to get to the nearest kind of InsurTech hub. So we decided to close this gap and create our own InsurTech community, which was extremely successful. For some events, we had more than 50% of our attendance being C-suite from local insurers, which is quite amazing. And 6 months later, we are part of the Global InsurTech Alliance, and we are talking to people from all over the world, flying to Ireland, really wanting to know what's happening in the local market, and this is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. And you know, there is one thing which, whenever I look at ecosystem, right, there is one thing which I would love to understand from you, which is how do you understand? How do you know if you're doing a good job in building the ecosystem? I mean, is there something that is there some specific output that you expect from all these parties to interact together? For example, like partnerships or you know, more visibility for specific players.
It's feedback. Feedback is very important. First of all, it's engagement from the local representatives of the insurance community, and we are engaging with the government structures as well, slowly but surely. And of course, feedback from our members. We have a very active community, and we get lots of ideas from them, what we should do, what we should not do. We didn't do all the things right from the very beginning, but we're learning and improving ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Even from Medici side, when we look at InsurTech, and we have recently analyzed about 800 startups in the InsurTech space, together with Ernst & Young, we have seen a few trends, which I'm going to share with you, and then I would love you to give me feedback from a different perspective as well for 2019. So I think there are 3 key elements that we are looking at. The number one is the huge opportunity that PSD2 will open for insurance technology startups. Because we tend to associate PSD2 only with fintech startups and not with InsurTech, but I think we'll have massive output from PSD2. I think in 3 key parts of the value chain of the insurance. Number one is in the definition of new product and services, which are way more catered for specific target segments, and you can do it because you have more data. The second one is for sure on the underwriting side. Exactly as alternative credit scoring companies are doing in consumer lending, that will happen also in the insurance underwriting for specific insurance products, obviously. And the last one is on the claims side, because if I am an insurer and I have access to your transaction data, then I can see exactly if you're spending money for your claim, and so I can repay back that in a shorter period of time, and I'm also less subject to frauds. And this is, I think, the first macro trend that I see. The second one, which is also very well connected, is digital bank assurance. Because insurance product distribution is by far the key problem of most of insurance companies. How can they solve the protection gap? They've always been doing like push sales. Can they do pull sales on the insurance product? And only by looking at the partnership between AXA and ING, which was sealed end of last year, you understand there is something that is going on, right? And we believe there will be many more of this partnership going forward in terms of insurance distribution. The last trend is always on the distribution, but on the micro policies. And we have seen companies like YOLO selling micro policies on demand that you can buy in a short period of time. And why is that relevant? Because we spoke to them, and we understood that a huge percentage of the buyers of those digital policies were first-time buyers of insurance products, meaning that push sales through product like YOLO is an early access to target customers, which is a new one. And so you can nurture them and acquire them for different policies. So I think this is fundamental. fundamental. I would also love to have your input on the key trends that you see apart from these, maybe specific to your market. But I think globally, this is what we have more or less seen.
Yeah, I think it's a very good list of trends for the next year. I will pick a couple of topics which you covered, and maybe I can provide a couple of examples of successful insurtech businesses in this area. Yes. So one topic you mentioned is micro policies and on-demand insurance in general. I think it's very important because I believe this is the future. This is one of the textbook models for insurance if we fast forward 5-10 years. I guess one of the most famous examples of on-demand insurance is Trove. They've been on the market for a number of years now. They have expanded quite substantially. So what does Trove do? If you don't know, it's an on-demand insurance solution that allows users to buy insurance with kind of an on and off mode for personal property. They start with photographic equipment and laptops and these kind of small items, and now they're moving into different parts of the market. They have been extremely successful. They have a very good team, and again, this is a textbook example, I think, for the future of this industry. Another example, very quickly, is my personal favorite, Flock from the UK. It's an insurance proposition for drone pilots to use mobile phones to buy insurance for their drones. And it's extremely data-driven. They analyze your proposed flight path. They look at hyperlocal weather conditions, proximity of important objects like schools, and even depending on time of the day, the danger of drone falling on a schoolyard is different. So they take all these different factors and combine them into a very sophisticated model, which allows them to price drone insurance on demand when they need it. And again, I really love this model because it's data-driven, it's on demand, and I believe it's the future.
You know, I agree. And I'm also expecting this year to see many more solutions on the preventive insurance side,
very much
connected
so, yes,
to health insurance. I think that will be, at least we've seen many insurance companies looking into that area. So great.
Yes.
I think we're also bang
yes,
on time.
Fantastic. We're almost out of time. So thank you so much for sharing the stage with me. And I would like to welcome Hugh Terry from the Digital Insurer. Oh, how are you? Now, so please introduce yourself.
Now working?
Yep.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I call myself an insurance immigrant. I've been in the insurance industry for about 30 years, and the last 25 years have been in Asia and about 20 years in Singapore. And like all good immigrants, I ended up setting up a business in this sort of dot-com era in Singapore, and I was very fortunate. I guess that sort of lit the seed, if you like, for my interest and passion in how do you use technology to transform the insurance industry. And I set up the Digital Insurer about 6 years ago, really to sort of start talking about that. And we've ended up with a sort of platform and community of interest, and probably the world's largest knowledge base on digital insurance. So I'm a digital insurance geek from the UK originally, but most of my experience is in Asia.
Yes, so in the insurance community, we often look at the Asian market with great degree of envy. First of all, because of its size, and also the opportunity, because as you know, the less traditional the market is, the more opportunities to go digital really quick. So can you tell us a little bit about the insurtech ecosystem in Asia-Pacific region?
Yeah, so a big question to answer with not much time. I guess we all know it's a huge region, lots of countries, and a region of contrasts. And I suppose just to try and answer that question, I wanted to take two examples at opposite extremes. So one, Singapore, the other, China. Now, we heard Dia earlier articulate very well sort of the Singapore model. So I won't go into that in too much detail, but in essence, you've got a very small but rich country investing enormously in creating an ecosystem because it has to do that to be able to compete as such a small nation. And it is a huge success story in terms of what it does, but it doesn't have a natural home market, only 5 million people, so it's not a natural home for innovation. Now, if you compare that with China, China, in my view, is the crucible of insurance innovation. And why do I say that? It's because there's certain natural advantages that China has that you don't quite see anywhere else around the world. So if you look at digital payments, probably the most advanced in the world. Social media, probably the most advanced in the world. Tech companies, probably the most advanced in the world. And then a sort of regulatory environment that is quite permissive in terms of creating new business models. And then essentially you've got a lot of consumers, especially from an insurance perspective, who don't come in with preconceived ideas of what insurance is. So they're open to new propositions. And as a result of that, I think when you see in China, you see a sort of natural ecosystem has developed around test and learn very quickly in a very large market. And if it works, invest more money. So China's kind of special, I think, and something we can all learn from perhaps.
What about the rest of the area?
Obviously, there's lots of countries around there, and each of them is obviously developing their own sort of insurtech capability, but it's very fragmented. And actually, when you see Asia, because it's got something like half the global growth of insurance, it's a great market for what I call new digital business models. But it isn't, outside of China, such a market for native and core tech development. So you see that in other markets in Europe, in the US, you see that less in, say, Southeast Asia in particular. So that fragmentation obviously is something that creates some challenges, and people are trying to address that. And Singapore is very focused on that, and MAS as well works in the ASEAN region in particular.
Yes, very good. I think this region has very unique opportunities there, and if I try to compare it with Ireland, I didn't really see some similarities, but also a lot of differences. First of all, of course, the Irish market is much smaller, and if we look at the breakdown of insurtech businesses there, you can see that the majority of them work in the B2B space rather than B2C. So what could be the reason behind it? Well, you can look at it from different perspectives, but I think one of the major drivers is regulation. I again look at Singapore as one of the best examples how to do this kind of engagement with insurtech businesses right. In Ireland, we don't have as progressive regime yet, partially because of recent past, and therefore the cost of rolling out new direct-to-consumer products is reasonably high. So if there is such an opportunity, such an idea, we tend to go across the water into the UK market and succeed there. Another interesting observation about Irish businesses, and it's not just insurtech but fintech in general, is that we are very mobile, and because specifically the size of the market, we tend to go global much sooner if you compare it with, let's say, continental Europe. So it's very typical to start something locally, try out the UK, and then go straight to Asia. And it's a very attractive route. So can you share some insights how to do it right?
I'll try. I have to say, first of all, I had a very enjoyable St. Patrick's Day ball last month in Singapore. There were about 400 people from Ireland there, so I can certainly attest to the geographical mobility of people from Ireland. And I guess when you look at opportunities, we've sort of created a framework to sort of help us to think about this, sort of insurtech, and we have a sort of two lenses that we look at it. And one side of the lens is what we call value chain innovation. So how can technology companies help existing incumbents to improve in certain areas on the value chain, be that claims, be that underwriting, be that sales, and be that marketing? So there's lots of opportunity there for specialist companies who've got established tech who come from outside of the region and come in. And there are a number of success stories in that area. So Shift Technologies, for example, focuses in claims as being quite successful. Amodo, who's in telematics, has a very good relationship with AIG, and the list goes on there. So that's, if I was in Europe and I had some good tech, I would be looking to Asia and saying, okay, there's opportunities there to explore. Obviously, you need to get that market entry strategy right, and there's lessons to be learned around that. The other side of the lens is where you get into, okay, let's talk about new digital business models. And I think this is where Asia really excels because of that growth, because of that ability to really experiment in real time. I think you're seeing a lot more innovation in that area. And there, of course, the advantage and what we're seeing is actually it's companies that have got existing large customers, have got very good brands, have got digital connectivity with their customers, are able to say, okay, let's have a look at what those insurance opportunities are. And then that's where technology companies can come in and actually partner and say, actually, I'll come in and sit on your side, on the consumer side, and help you. And you've probably all heard about Grab, which is a ride-sharing company that's partnered with Zhongyang Technologies. So Zhongyang itself, very successful in China. Its strategy coming out of China is to set up a technology company and then partner with people as well. So there are those opportunities as well as part of a larger sort of ecosystem.
Do you think cultural differences and differences how we approach insurance in general would be a bit of an inhibitor in portability of these models?
Yeah, I don't know if it's culture, but I think there's definitely environmental differences. So when you look at China and you look at the environment that's created in China, it doesn't quite exist anywhere else in the world. So I'm a little bit cautious of saying you can just lift and shift those ecosystem models. And actually what you're seeing with Chinese companies themselves is they've got such a large home market that up until very recently, they weren't looking outside of China. And why would you? But now it's starting to change. But what you're seeing is technology partnerships, so there's sort of Alibaba's or the Ants and Tencent are starting to partner. And the crucible of that innovation is actually in Southeast Asia. So you're starting to see experiments where Chinese companies are coming outside of China. And there are issues around this which come down to things like the way you approach data management, your privacy regulations, which will to a certain extent determine whether or not these models are successful. And when we look at this subject of ecosystem itself, for me, I think of ecosystems as business models actually, because ultimately it's about can you deliver on business. And there was a very interesting report from McKinsey which I'd recommend you read, which is on ecosystems, and they identified something like 8 or 9 different ecosystems that are being created. And for me, insurance has to find its place in those natural ecosystems, and that's where the business opportunities are.
It's a very good report. I highly recommend looking at it.
Yeah, you read it, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. I think we are getting close to the end of the session.
It's great talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Oops. Oop. Okay, I have my co-conspirator up, who is João Mota, who is the Joanne Mota, who's at Portugal in FinTech and InsurTech Association. Over to you.
Thank you. I don't know if you want a brief presentation. I'm João Machado Mota from the Portuguese FinTech and InsurTech Association. We are an ecosystem association with members like banks, insurance, lawyers, startups, tech companies, and in general terms we try to develop the Portuguese FinTech and InsurTech ecosystem in a collaborative way.
And what was the seed for the creation of the association? How did that happen?
Well, in general terms, as you know, Portugal had a major economic and financial crisis in 2010. The banks had major financial and balance sheet problems and have been adjusting the balance sheet since then. So they didn't adopt fintech strategies, that they didn't develop the fintech and insurtech environment as much as in other countries. The main contributions for the development of the fintech environment ecosystem have been from small projects, startups, small companies. And at a certain point, they just need to network, to know each other, to know to which door they should knock to sell their products. Yeah. In general terms, I think, as a matter of fact, the fintech development of the fintech sector in Portugal was quite peculiar, because the role of the banks was really small. And that's instructive for startups and for other countries. Since our startups, our fintechs and insurtech startups didn't have domestic markets, business to consumer, business to business, their solution was to develop their prototypes, develop their solutions, catch a fly and go to London, to the United Kingdom, to the United States, and sell their products. And we've got a lot of successful fintechs that were born in Portugal and now operate worldwide. And now that the banking sector and insurtech sector is solving their balance sheet problems, and that they are developing fintech and insurtech strategies, they could rely on those fintech companies as support, as models, as examples to develop their strategies. So I think it's peculiar. I don't know if it happens in other countries.
So you've seen sort of, I guess, Portuguese people go outside of Portugal and create successful businesses?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. You know, for instance, Fedzai, Cedars, now James, there are a lot of Portuguese companies with more success outside of Portugal than in Portugal. Right now they are coming back to Portugal, but their main markets have been outside of Portugal.
Yeah, and earlier on we had a little bit of a discussion around skills, I guess. So maybe we could talk about that sort of skills environment from your perspective in Portugal. Do you see the education system in Portugal sort of adapting and helping people to create these new skills, whether it's at university or even in the workplace?
Sure. Our education system, high school and college, I would say that is very. It has two different parts. One, the engineering, programming, math part. It's art. It's demanding. And the other probably studies. That is much more easier. That probably explains why we have good engineers, programmers, and not that good marketeers. You know the British system. You know that high schools, public schools, colleges have theater studies, and that probably explains a little bit the role that the British companies can assume in finance and in marketing and so on. But it's you know better than me the role of this kind of institutions and education.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess if I was looking at Portugal and saying, I guess from say a bank or an insurance company perspective, what would you say to me? What would you be pitching to me in terms of Portugal's strengths?
Portuguese. If you were from Portuguese, from a foreigner bank, insurance company, I would say that there are two main reasons to go to Portugal. The first is to contract human resources. We've got good engineers, we've got good programmers, math. the wages are still low, and so there are lots of companies, international companies, creating research and development centers in Portugal, Google, for instance. So that's one approach. The other approach is looking for fintech and insurtech solutions in lending, in artificial intelligence. There are a lot of companies that are technically very good, but due to lack of marketing skills, weren't able to move from Portugal, and probably will find some bargains.
Right, okay. And tell me more about some of the success story. You mentioned James earlier on, and
yeah.
I don't know if everyone's familiar with that. Maybe just talk a little bit about what they do and how they've been successful.
Well, they are risk analysis company that uses artificial intelligence. They are probably 3 or 4 guys. One is a member of our board as well. They developed their prototype. They started to work with a Portuguese bank in the risk department, and as far as I know, after their first business in Portugal, they just flew to London and started to sell to British banks, always trying to improve their models, and I think that right now they are starting to be a reference in this market.
Yeah, great. I guess just in terms of, we've got a little bit of time left, maybe we could just touch a little bit upon regulations.
Yeah.
And you know, my experience, and obviously you heard all about Singapore and you know, the sandbox and things that really helps to sort of test and learn, if you like. Are you seeing those things coming into Portugal yet?
I think the Portuguese regulator is quite conservative. Everybody knows that there are role for law in 3 questions. First, definition of property rights, then definition of contractual rules, basically to protect consumers, and then definition of rules or taxes whenever there are externalities in a market or in an activity. The problem is, and so the regulation is needed for this. The problem is that the public in general, the politicians, the press are demanding too much from the regulators, are demanding a zero-risk environment. Yeah. And this, the regulators only have one solution to this problem to avoid the risk: stiff innovation and competition. This problem is, in my opinion, but you certainly know different environments, different regulatory frameworks, and probably have a much better opinion than we. But I think this problem is more acute in situations where the regulator is the same as the supervisor of the activity, where there's no firewall between who writes the rules and who implements the rules.
Yeah, I think you have to have a very conscious separation. And I guess, I mean, I think we all know that regulations are always going to have an element of legacy, and I think this is one of the things that actually means that the reality, as we all know, is this is sort of a multi-year initiative, and change does take a little bit of time as well. So.
Well, yes, but you know, the legacy, the companies, the incumbents are always complaining about how big is the regulation burden for them and is not for fintechs, when in fact the activities they realize their activities are different from fintechs, so the regulation should be different, I suppose.
Yep, this is true. I can see we're in the red, so I'll take my leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mustafa?
Hi, Joe.
Welcome. Thank
So-
you.
So it looks that we have not too many people in the room, so perhaps you can just wrap it up quickly.
Yeah, sure.
I'll be starting by saying that why we don't have any unicorn in Turkey. Because I was asked this question a couple of weeks back by an international development bank, which is headquartered not around the region, but somewhere far. So they were quite interested in finding out more about the Turkish ecosystem here. That is a very interesting question.
Yes.
So you were saying that you have some companies that are successful, but they are operational outside of Portugal. That's why they are successful.
Yes.
So they acquired some customers, some big clients basically, and they were readily available there in terms of the readiness, in terms of onboarding their products, which is good. What about the Portuguese banks, Portuguese insurance companies? Yes, they have some cash flow problems, they have their cyclicality problems, so on and so forth. But I'm just trying to make a replica of that discussion for Turkey. So we have very big banks, we have insurance companies quite successful, we have some other financial entities as well, some big technology companies too, but we don't have any unicorn. So it is, I believe it's $1 million question, but that's why ecosystem matters more. Okay, that's why we are looking into it. And that's why we need to be sort of supporting the promising, I wouldn't have to say startups, but products, right? It doesn't have to be coming from a startup, basically. So, the governments should be there, which is not quite a priority, but they should be in a supporting role in a way. And the accelerators, the incubators, the investors, it is a combination of many things. It looks that we are lacking some of the ingredients in the picture. It is the answer why we don't have any unicorn at the moment. It is an 80 million country, very big. We have young people, entrepreneurs. So I'm asking myself as well as answering it, but I would like to have your thoughts on that too. So why don't you have any unicorn?
Well, I guess we have 2 or 3 companies that are big. Our market is small. Our companies have some problems to enter international markets. It's their first priority, but they have some problems. But there are one. I also would like to tell you something. Today I talked with a couple of 3, 4 Turkish fintechs, and I found their solutions very interesting. But not ideas, solutions, effectively solutions. And they think they are interested in the Portuguese market, a very small marginal market. So it's a very good sign that your ecosystem is live and well. There's a problem, as you know, with the funding of of funding startups. In every country we can get seed capital and probably can get the first rounds of scale up. Whenever we pass a certain limit, we've got 2 sources of capital: in the United States, San Francisco, and China. That's a problem. So I don't know how things operate here in Turkey, and in regional markets you know much better than me, and probably can tell a bit about this, but funding is a problem.
Again, I think this would take a lot of water, this question, and I think we need to organize another or maybe 2 or 3 more roundtables by having more stakeholders into that discussion. But it is a fact, it is a reality, so we need to face it. And if you like to, sort of build and boost an ecosystem which is functioning, I think we need to consider such paradigms as well as such parameters, in the place. Thank you very much, and perhaps we can just wrap it up. And I know people are a bit, tired. Before you leave the stage, so guys, there's going to be a photo shoot in the stadium. So it's going to be something quite memorable. Just take your time for that, and if you like to, stay on, and we can just directly go there, and our, people in the crew, they will help us out. Afterwards, we'll be leaving the stadium, crossing the street, and hop on our ride for the Bosporus. So it's going to be a fun night, and I would highly advise you to not to miss it. And yeah, and this is the wrap for today, and hopefully you have enjoyed the discussions, and I'll see you in the morning. Thank you very much.